Um, Welcome to our workshop, The New World of Talent Management. I'd like to just take a moment to introduce myself and our panelists and frame up our topic for the next hour. My name is Alissa Stayn. I'm an HR leader with expertise in attracting, retaining, and developing talent in global organizations. And throughout my career, I've been known for building culture and leading change in high growth global and US organizations. I've been pleased to enjoy success most recently as a chief talent officer in a multi-billion-dollar construction management firm, and prior to that as the head of workforce planning and leading the HR business partners at Gartner during a sustained period of double-digit growth. I'll be moderating for the next hour. Then we have David Jones, who is a founder and CEO of the Talent Enterprise. And my screen, he's in the top right.
Okay.
And the Talent Enterprise is a leading assessment and behavioral science organization focused on promoting productivity and positivity with clients across Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. After almost 30 years as a people professional, David is a chartered fellow of the CIPD, a labor market economist, and a published author of several books on talent, including Unlocking the Paradox of Plenty, Game Changers, and the Forthcoming Future of Talent Assessment. And David is joining us today from the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you. Thanks, Alissa.
My pleasure. Welcome. And then in the lower left corner of my screen, we have Marc Effron, who possibly many of our attendees have had the pleasure of joining Marc's webinars over the past several years, as I have. Marc helps the world's largest and most successful companies transform HR and talent management. His ability to combine the strongest organizational science with practical guidance for implementation makes him a favorite of business leaders globally. Marc authored the Harvard-published books One Page Talent Management, which is often referred to as the Talent Management Bible, and 8 Steps to High Performance. And before founding the Talent Strategy Group, Marc was an HR executive at Bank of America and Avon Products. Marc and I have had the pleasure of working together in the past. So Marc, welcome and great to have you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And then in hopefully just a moment, we will have Monica Poole-Knox joining us. Monica provides leadership to Microsoft's cultural transformation initiatives through creating solutions that enable the organization to fully leverage the capabilities of its talent. In this capacity, Monica leads Microsoft's global career management initiatives focused on internal talent movement, individual development planning, career planning, goal setting, and organization-wide capability. In this capacity, she also leads the talent architecture practice, developing Microsoft's internal talent profile and other AI-enabled data frameworks that really work on facilitating activities such as talent movement, targeted learning, onboarding, and mentorship. And you'll hear about some of that today when Monica joins us. So we're really excited to be here with all of you to share some thoughts on the themes we're seeing as talent management takes shape for the future across the globe. I think we'll hear some things that have worked for us over the past many years, and then we'll learn about some things that are really happening as our candidate marketplace, both internal and external, evolves. During our time together, you will hear some fascinating research that's been done, as well as some incredible programs and solutions that are being designed and implemented in companies across the globe. And we are really looking forward to this time together, and of course, welcome your questions in the chat panel as well. So I'm going to start by asking our panelists to share their thoughts on some of the work that each one of them have been doing, and then we'll move to a more interactive session with some follow-on questions. And again, we really welcome your comments and questions along the way. So David, maybe we'll start with you. Since of our panelists, you've been awake the longest today.
Thank you.
When you think about the new world of talent management and some of the research you and your team are doing around the candidate market in fast-growing economies across the globe, what are some of the key findings that you can share with our participants today?
Well, I think the talent landscape is changing quite dramatically. It's a very interesting time to be a talent professional, I think, at the moment. And I think there's a number of different drivers for the change which help to put some of the specific project work or specific assessments into context. I think one is demographic. I think in the parts of the world that we tend to do a lot of working at the Talent Enterprise, so this could be in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, etc. Then obviously we see a big demographic growth. And I think this is quite different to what we see in the West, whether that's Europe, North America, or even in places like Japan. So most of the countries that we operate in, the average age of a worker is 25 or less. There's some stunning statistics that you see from places like India, where every month for the next decade, there's a net new number of job entrants into the workplace, which is exceeding either 1.1 or 1.2 million net new job entrants every single month. And then, of course, if you look at places like Africa already, in Africa, I think there's approximately 2.5 billion Africans in the world already. By 2050, that will increase further, and it's supposed to be projected towards the end of the century at 4.5 billion Africans. And so the fact that you have a large number of young people in the workplace or looking to enter the workplace changes the sorts of talent acquisition or talent development approaches that we would use. I think another big change, particularly in the Middle East, is the number of women who are coming into the formal workplace. And I think this is quite different, again, to what we see in some of the more developed economies in the world, where actually in Europe, and I think in North America as well, the number of working women, that means they get paid for their work. I think a lot of women work anyway, but actually getting paid for their work is declining. And we see in places like Saudi Arabia, where even though it's starting from a very low base, the numbers of working women have actually tripled in the last 5 years alone. So this demographic base is driving a lot of change. And I think if you want to attract, develop, engage, retain that group of people, you have to think about making sure that your talent practices are resonating with that group. And it's not just something which, I'm pointing to myself here, but a middle-aged, mid-career talent professional thinks is really cool. It has to be something that group of people can really buy into. I think we can also see that even events like this week, right, with COVID-19, meaning that many governments or many employers are actually mandating that people should not come into their formal workplace, but they should continue to work remotely, almost exclusively so. And so I think this then again changes the nature of leadership, it changes the nature of collaboration, it changes the nature of productivity and how we get stuff done in all of our organizations. And then I think the other aspect is the technology and productivity aspect. I think arguably, as a labour market economist, you could argue that although there's a lot of noise about the role of technology and the end of employment of human beings and stuff like this, you could argue that actually there's too little adoption of technology right now, and we're seeing productivity levels plateau across many parts of the world. And this is having an impact on how people get recognized, how they get rewarded. And so you could argue that if we were to employ more technology, particularly the technology that enhances human capabilities rather than seeks to replace them, then I think we could see a very different approach towards work being accelerated still further. So I think these are just some of the big drivers that set this into context. And I think then what that means is that when it comes to the types of assessments, this is what we specialize in, so I'll talk about these in a bit more detail. We have to change the way that we do that. So rather than asking lots of questionnaires and suffering from survey fatigue, we should measure some of the behaviors that we're looking at directly. So if we're looking for communication skills, for instance, we don't need a competency to measure that. We don't need a behavioral observation. We can do an analysis on somebody's inbox. We can look at how they engage with people, what sort of reactions people are getting in a forum like this, for instance. And that can be a direct measure rather than a proxy measure through a questionnaire. We can also measure the things that people are saying they're most interested in. So if that's innovation, if that's digital readiness, then we can measure those organizational, team and individual capabilities directly. I think our prediction for the future is that questionnaires will be dead. So we're looking at things like 360 video feedback, direct feedback, gamification, using metadata as a direct measure. So not just what people do in the assessments themselves, but how can they multitask? How can they also achieve other things while they are conducting what is previously called a formal assessment? So we're looking at things that we call, in complement to psychometrics, we're calling them behavior metrics, where we measure behaviors directly. And this can be in individual fields, but it can also be in fields like employee engagement, where we can look for the way that people engage with each other through network analysis, through gait analysis. How people walk into the workplace can often be a predictor of their level of engagement. And it also means that we can make sure that we're measuring the authenticity and the resonance of people's communication through a talent assessment or a talent development type of event. I think the final thing, just to add to this, is that we're also seeing, to some extent, human behavior is changing. It's not a static phenomenon. So again, particularly for under 25s, we do a lot of research. We're doing a lot of research at the moment with students and young employees in Africa, in the Middle East, and into South Asia as well. And we're seeing measures of traditional factors like whether somebody is an introvert or an extrovert. These were previously considered to be mutually exclusive. We're now seeing that young people under the age of 25 are most likely to be what we call ambiverts, in the sense that particularly online, or particularly when they're working remotely, they're very happy to share feedback, to give an opinion, to like something or dislike something very directly. But in the more traditional direct types of interactions or collaborations in the workplace, then they might be perceived more introverted in a classical way. And then similarly, when it comes to their motivation, it used to be considered that people were either intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated, and this again was mutually exclusive. And now what we're seeing, particularly again with the under 25s, is that this is something which we're seeing as ambitrinsic type of motivation, where we're seeing that young people in particular are very interested to understand the purpose of their work. They want a sense of meaning and identity from their work. They want to buy in literally to an employer brand which they feel connected to the values and the purpose. But at the same time, they also expect that their time is respected. They expect to be highly recognized. They value feedback, and they also value reward, and they expect to be paid at the highest level that the market will bear. So we see some interesting changes also in the way that the younger generation, and as I said, in the faster growing economies of the world, there typically is a young population growth and a younger workforce. So there's some very interesting changes. For instance, even in communication skills, we see more of a benefit and a resonance for what we call confirmatory communication on forums like this, or on online meetings, or on chat rooms, etc., where people look for that type of affirmation from their leaders or from their co-workers, and they value that more highly than they would in a direct, in-space type of communication.
Great. Well, thank you, David. It's really interesting to hear, especially some of the key changes, and also kind of the creation of almost some new verbiage and new descriptors, similar to how we're seeing new job titles and job titles that may not have existed 5 and 10 or even more years ago. I think we're also seeing that in competencies and, how we kind of, describe somebody, like the way you talked about an ambivert versus an introvert or an extrovert. So really interesting. Thank you for those comments. And for our listeners, if you have questions for David, just make a note of them. We're going to hear from Marc, and Monica is still trying to join us, and then we'll turn to questions. So Marc, I know that you and your team recently completed the 2019 Global HR Census, getting input from HR practitioners across the globe, some of whom may even be part of our audience today. Would you please share with us some of the key findings, especially as it relates to the new world of talent management and some of the critical themes that emerged from the survey?
Sure, would be happy to. First, I'm just looking at the chat window. Thanks to everyone for joining. It looks like we have folks from all around the world, so appreciate. I see a lot of folks here in the States, but also I see Hong Kong and Chile and Barcelona and others. So thanks so much for either getting up early or staying up late to participate on this. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate that. As Alissa mentioned, one of the things that I've been doing, our firm has been doing for years, is really trying to keep track of the HR profession and how it's emerging and evolving as a way of understanding how do we create the most impact, positive impact on organizations around the world. And we conducted our first global HR census last year. The goal is just to really understand the state of the field. How are we thinking about our work? Why are we in the profession? And we were a bit surprised by some of the findings. 4 big conclusions came out, and if you want to download the report, just go to our website, pick that up. Everything's always free when we do research. 4 big findings that came out of that research. The first big finding was that many people in HR are in the profession more for what we would call humanistic rather than capitalistic reasons. Now, how do we find that out? We asked a number of questions. We asked 6 questions about why are you in the HR function? And you could respond to any of those with either it's a primary reason, a secondary reason, or not a reason I'm in the HR function. So you can rate them all as primary, all as none. And what we found is that about more than 70% of people were primarily in the function to either balance the needs of a company and its employees or represent the needs of employees, and barely 50% said that they were actually in HR because they enjoyed being part of a capitalistic or a for-profit enterprise. Now, the challenge there is not that we have people with a humanistic mindset. That's wonderful. But our perspective would be it's a humanistic mindset plus a capitalistic mindset that's really going to optimize how effective we are in this function. And what we found is not only are more people in the function for the humanistic reasons, but when we did a little bit more data analysis, we found there were a few pockets. There was a hardcore humanistic pocket that had no interest in the capitalistic side of the business. And then we found another side that was more balanced, but a much smaller percentage of the respondents who had a very balanced perspective between I want to be here both for humanistic and capitalistic reasons. Now, the challenge there is somewhat obvious. One, in that there appear to be different minds in HR about why we're here and who we're here to serve. Now, they're all good reasons, but it feels like we might need to get a little more consensus or agreement about why are we showing up every day? What are we here to do? Secondly, unfortunately, that first conclusion plays into some of the worst stereotypes of HR as being folks who aren't particularly concerned about the business. Love people, want people to be happy, engaged, productive, but perhaps not in a way that's connected to the business as effectively as it should be. So that was the first big conclusion, is that we are here more for humanistic than capitalistic reasons. The second finding that we thought was interesting was how we see our own skill sets and capabilities and how do those align with the future needs of organizations. We asked people to rate their capabilities in a variety of behaviors, and the 2 lowest ranked behaviors, one was I understand my business deeply and thoroughly, which connects pretty well to that first point. If we aren't interested in the business, then we're not going to become very knowledgeable about it. And the second lowest ranked was I am able to, or I'm competent at influencing senior executives. So what were we good at? We were good at knowing our function well and building strong relationships with peers. The takeaway from that is we are competent people who get along well with others, but when it comes to knowing the business and being able to influence up, we say that's the worst, the thing that we're worst at across our capabilities. So we find that there's a bit of a skill gap there. Added to that is when we asked, what capabilities do you have today, more technical capabilities versus which do you think you'll need more in the future? And we showed us being very good at talent management, very good at talent acquisition, very good at HR strategy, but we self-rated ourselves as a profession as weakest at data analytics, comfort with other kind of data involved areas. And again, it plays a bit into the negative stereotypes that some folks have of HR as, okay, these are a bunch of folks who don't know the business, who can't influence, who aren't comfortable with data. And it suggests that if we're aware of that as a positive trend, meaning, hey, we get it, we need to get better, cool. But if it's saying, yeah, we're just not good at this stuff, then it feels like we have a bit of reckoning to do about how are we going to best add value to companies. Third point was, this one was really interesting to me. We called it tempered ambition. So we asked people, what would you like to do going forward? We gave them a wide variety of choices: be a CEO, be a head of a business unit, be a CHRO, be a head of a sub-function in HR. Only 39% of people said that they wanted to be a CHRO, which seemed odd. And because I haven't worked in other functions, I actually reached out to some of my friends who are in marketing and sales and supply chain. And I said, how many people in your function want that top job? And they said, well, everybody wants the top job. And I said, well, strange, because in my function, apparently they don't. And we dug into some of the other data that we gathered. Well, maybe CHRO is a crappy job and you shouldn't want it. But we looked at how CHROs self-rated themselves in our survey. They were less stressed than others. They only worked a few more hours a week. They had great work-life balance, and they got plenty of sleep. So some of those factors feel like, well, it doesn't sound like a horrible job. And so the question is it that top job that doesn't have attributes that make it attractive to others? Or is there let's call it a sub-level of ambition that says, I want to be good at my function. I want to be the best comp person. I want to be the best TA person, best TM person. And we're so technically interested in what we do that the more general management layer of CHRO just doesn't appeal to us. But there's some very practical implications from that around things like HR succession. My colleague Zach Upchurch is about to put out a study about CHRO trends and what happened to CHROs last year. And one of the findings is that the lines for internally sourced HR leaders and externally sourced are about to cross, with more CHROs being sourced externally. And part of those findings might play into that. You don't have a lot of folks at lower levels saying, I'd love to be CHRO, put me in. Final finding is we asked a lot of questions. It'll be interesting. Hi, Monica. Around sleep and stress and other factors that we thought could influence HR. And it turns out that we're a pretty rested and ready bunch. We get reasonable levels of sleep, not perfect, but reasonable. We rate the quality of that sleep pretty high. Our stress levels aren't that high. And when we feel stress, it's not that intense of stress. So it feels like we're not overwhelmed as a profession, which means that we should hopefully have some energy to apply to some of the challenge that I outlined. So that's a fairly long summary, but great data when it's all online. So you can go to our website at talentstrategygroup.com and download that.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And so we had Monica, and then she popped off. So we'll see if we get her back. But in the interim, I had seen that David.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Apologies, I've been having technical difficulties for quite some time. We should use Microsoft technology next time, Enrique.
Welcome. I hear myself going down. So, Monica, since we have you now, we'd love to hear about some of the work. And sorry, thank you, Mark, for those really insightful studies. And somebody had asked in the panel, in the chat, where they could find the studies. And we do have a colleague that shared the link to your group. Are the census results available on your website?
Yeah, absolutely. They just go to the website. It's probably somewhere on the right-hand side, or just go to our publication section, and it'll be in there along with lots of other great articles.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so again, welcome, Monica. So we've heard a little bit about what David's seeing in the candidate market in our fast-growing economies, and Marc talked a little bit about talent in the HR space in particular. We'd love to hear about some of the work you're doing and the work that you're leading on talent pools, career development practices, and leveraging both the external market and your company's internal talent. Because I think as we get into the new world of talent management, it's not only important that we continue to canvas the external market, but that we really leverage the talent that we have in the organization. So we'd love to hear about some of the really innovative things you're doing.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Alissa, and good to see you, Marc and David, and welcome to all the folks on the call here today. This is a great topic. I'd love to talk about it. This term necessity is the mother of invention is probably a term that describes the work that we're doing at Microsoft. Can you all hear this? Can you all hear background noise?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if it's super distracting.
It's low level. It's not too bad.
Okay. Well, if you can hear me, then I'll keep going. And so I think one of the things that, we're struggling with, which, a lot of companies are struggling with, is how do we find the skills that we need? We know that particularly with technical skills and maybe even some of the softer skills, regarding complex critical thinking and, just some of the dynamics happening in our market. We know we have a skilled shortage. We've been talking about that for quite some time. And I think particularly for companies that are based in technology, we are looking out in the market and we're seeing that we're going to need to do some different things in order to have the skills that we need in the future. And actually, quite frankly, we're seeing that now. And so when we look at that, we have to start thinking about how can we be more innovative? How can we do things a little bit differently to ensure that the skills that we need are going to be available in the market? And it's interesting because, maybe 10 years ago, we wouldn't have necessarily considered ourselves a competitor with, say, a bank, right? But today, banks and insurance companies and CPG organizations are going after similar technical talent. And so all of a sudden, this competitive landscape is widened and we're all going after some of the same, technical talent, just simply because technology is just becoming ubiquitous, right? We all depend on technology no matter what business that we're in. And so we started with this adage of, okay, well, if we've got to be a little innovative, we've got to think about this differently. How can we shift? And, going external for talent is something we're really used to. I think a lot of companies are kind of set up that way. We need particular sets of talent. We might look at the folks within our organization to see, okay, who particularly at maybe a lower contribution level would like to and move up. But oftentimes we don't see, or nor do we have the ability to look at the skills and capabilities that people may have developed prior to their current job. And so at Microsoft, we've been thinking about, okay, look, we've got, Amazon, we've got Google and Facebook and other companies coming after our talent. How do we think about our own talent as our most lucrative talent pool? And so the problem with that is that oftentimes, Microsoft and many other companies, we don't necessarily capture, we capture your resume when you come into the organization, but we don't keep that information, right? It comes in through the ATS, we get you into the organization, but then we don't necessarily access that again, and so that information is lost. So what we've been saying now is, okay, how do we better understand the skills, capabilities, and experiences of our talent, regardless of when they learn their background, their skill, and ensure that these folks are considered, whether it's a job opportunity, it could be a short-term assignment. How do we really think about our internal talent as our most lucrative talent pool? And so to do that, we've had to use technology to kind of figure out how to do that. Were you trying to enter in, Alissa?
I'm sorry. The background got but now it's
subsided a bit. Okay. All right, well, I'll continue, and if it's too distracting, let me know. So what I was explaining is that, you know, we've developed a tool. It's essentially LinkedIn for internal talent within Microsoft. It gives our employees access to see, you know, the skills, the capabilities, the background of all the other Microsoft employees. And it's allowed us to, you know, better understand, you know, what resources we have within the organization, within our own talent pool. And so, you know, I'll just give you a quick example. Just within my own team, we were trying to do an online video training for a program that we have. And we wanted someone to have this, you know, real nice radio voice to do the voiceover. But we don't have anybody on our team with that kind of a training. So we went into this product that I'm describing. It's actually called Who Plus, and it looks just like LinkedIn. In fact, it is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a Microsoft company. And we were able to search and find someone who had experience at Disney doing this. Person isn't doing this in their current job, but we're going to be contacting this person, I think we already have, to say, hey, will you help us with this particular project? And so that's the kind of, you know, application that you know, companies can have when they really lean into understanding you know, the background of their talent. And certainly I'm giving an example of just a project, but you know, it could also have applicability to figuring out, you know, the right kind of staffing model for a new business, for collaboration. So I guess the uber point here is that I think it's important for organizations to understand, you know, the talent pool that they have, and really, with a preference, tap into that talent pool, whether it's for moving people into new roles, or whether it's even for identifying who potentially, with a little bit of training, can then be great candidates for some of the opportunities that are on the horizon for the organization.
Great. And Monica, if you just look in the chat window, you're actually getting a few questions about kind of the LinkedIn connectivity, and if you could just say a little bit more about that Who Plus platform that you're building. So if you could maybe do a bit of a deeper dive there for our participants.
Yeah, sure. I was looking at the chat window here, quite a bit of comments. Yeah, so there's a question about, is the platform reliant upon people self-identifying? I mean, if you think about LinkedIn, and I think we all use LinkedIn, it is completely up to the employee to, you know, raise their hand and say, hey, I can speak this particular language, or I work for a particular company. You know, what we wanted to do was use that same psychology of LinkedIn and bring it internally to our organization. It's funny because I don't know about you, but every company that I've worked at, if we're asking people to create an internal profile, you get a response rate probably similar to a survey response rate, right? At best, 10%. But interestingly enough, let someone get, you know, a new job, or maybe develop a patent, and in 5 minutes it's updated on LinkedIn. And so what we said was, let's use that same kind of psychology and bring it internally. And so we absolutely love the fact that it's self-ID. And there is kind of an honor system, right? But that's the same within the market. Recruiters will go out and they'll look at LinkedIn and they'll say, okay, this person has these skill sets. And how much more so is that important to do internally within the organization? So yes, it is absolutely set up self-ID. And if there are updates that need to be made, we expect that the employee will actually update their LinkedIn profile. And then that is linked to the internal view.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. Thanks, Monica.
Okay, I'm echoing again, so I apologize. Could everybody mute just for a moment, and then we'll come back and open the mics? So David, a couple of minutes ago when you were speaking, I don't know if you saw that we did get a question where one of our participants asked, does the ambivalence in profiles imply that we should focus on building personality profiles for talent specific per company without relying much on psychological theories. Could you speak to that, please?
Sure. So thank you for that. I think building on what some of the other panel members also said, I think we have to be very careful how we use some of the tools which are available to us. They can be very powerful in a positive way, but they could also be very pernicious if they're misused or somehow we're a little bit lazy in the way that we approach them. So I think when you talk about psychological models, it's very important to build on a strong basis of theoretical and positive intellectual foundations for everything we do. I think there's a lot of what has been very well established in the 20th century in terms of tools that we would use, whether they're assessments or analytical tools, which are actually being questioned today, and maybe they didn't have the firm basis or firm foundation of fact when they were first promulgated in the earlier parts of the 20th century. And I think there are several assessments and there are several analytical processes which are probably quite famous that people would know about in regard to that. I think it was interesting what Marc was saying, I think about the profession as a whole, because I think the good news is maybe if we recognize as a community that we're not very good on analytics, or we want to improve further on analytics, then I think that's the first big step. But I think there's some bad news associated with that as well, in the sense that I think we use a lot of analytics, or we use machine learning or AI, and at the heart of it, as far as I understand, is old-fashioned statistics, right? Which is often quite demotivating or quite unpopular amongst people to be able to get to grips with. And I think we need to be able to break that barrier as a community, but also within our organizations. I think we also need to make sure that we as human resource professionals are taking a leadership role in this regard, because I think this is the new frontier of human resources, right? I think a lot of the other things that we heard about from the study about getting recognized in the C-suite and all that sort of stuff, I mean, honestly, with all respect to the study and to the participants, I think that is a debate which is decades old. And I think if we're not beyond that now, then we have a serious identity problem as a profession. But I think being able to get to grips with how we use data, we have to obviously make sure we're complying with standards like GDPR, or in California, I think there's a consumer data protection scenario, and I'm sure in many other jurisdictions that's all coming further and further down the pipeline. But we also have to think that I think in probably most of our employment contracts, it says that whatever data we're generating while we're at work belongs to the company. And I think in a lot of the projects that we've been involved in, a big step forward as to what we do is either to clean and connect a lot of the existing data that is held in separate repositories for paying people, for providing learning opportunities for people, for connecting people for communication purposes. A lot of data cleaning is required before we can develop some of these applications. Or I think with Monica's example, which I think is really great, is having something which is self-reported. I think if we are going to really get the most of this latent talent that we have in all of our organizations, and to really understand what other capabilities people bring with them into the workplace, then I think we need to be able to make sure that we are also measuring things like attrition risk, because if we're investing more and more in our current employees and seeing that talent pool as something which is more and more valuable, then understanding at what points or what triggers our potential attrition risks becomes even more important than it would have been in the past. And I think being able to understand and getting the most out of that internal talent and provide insights for line managers, for senior managers, for other talent professionals is really the most obvious practical next step in being able to squeeze the juice out of some of the power that the talent analytics can offer.
Thank you, David. And thanks. We have a lot of questions coming in on the side. I'll try to we'll sort of try to maybe just be relatively quick to tackle as many as we can here. So maybe Monica, if you can, I don't know if you saw the question about global mobility as it relates to talent. If you can maybe speak to what you're seeing on that front. And then Marc, if you have comments there as well, because I know that you and your team are working with some of the largest global organizations in the world. So I think as, we have immigration challenges and mobility challenges and sort of localization challenges, we'd love to hear, what you both are seeing. Monica, do you want to take that?
Sure. It's a great question, and it's a tricky one. And quite frankly, I think just mobility across the board is something we have been really digging into. It's a challenge because of the volume. One of the things we're trying to work through are just some simple mechanics in terms of getting back to candidates in a timely manner. We have something that are called informationals, which is, something we do within Microsoft where employees may ask to meet with the manager to learn more about the role, before they actually decide whether they want to interview, which can create some volume challenges for hiring managers. So in general, the whole scope of internal talent movement is an area of focus for us. I think the challenge with, internal mobility is probably similar to, what many of you are experiencing, which is how, people have an easier time getting out to, different regions across borders, regardless of what, country they live in. But the bigger challenge is how do they get back? And so, again, by utilizing some of the, internal tools that we have, we're hoping to do a better job with being able to anticipate that and repatriate folks back into their home country or even to other opportunities. But it's something that we're working on. We don't have it figured out. And, but it's critical to our ability to develop talent. I mean, we absolutely want for folks to have opportunities and experiences outside of their home country. We are a global company. We encourage movement. And at the same time, sometimes our internal processes and systems don't exactly allow for that. So, we're still working through it, but it is absolutely a top priority within the organization.
I think you're muted, Alissa, but I think you're nodding towards me. We see a few issues. Internal mobility feels like one of the great unfulfilled promises in HR. I've been in this field far too long, and we've been talking about this for years. And it feels like there are a few things getting in the way, starting with, to what extent do we clearly communicate whether mobility is a need or an option when people are joining our organization? So if Susie is signing up to go to ABC company, do we say, hey, Susie, being mobile is critical to your career? Or do we say, hey, Susie, you'll have the opportunity to be mobile? So how transparent are we about whether mobility factors into your career growth or not? So let's start there. But then just the mechanisms for movement tend not to be in place in most organizations. And by mechanisms, I mean, unfortunately, we in talent management, I don't think have done a great job at almost being internal brokers. I remember back in my Avon days, we used to have what we called a hot sheet call. Every region would have a hot sheet of, here are people who are great but need to move somewhere else, and here are open roles that we'd love to have someone from somewhere else. And it was much more of a live marketplace to say, you know what, you need a great marketing person. Susie is brilliant. She needs an outside of US move. Let's talk about Susie. And you made some on-the-spot decisions to start to break down some of those barriers. And the talent leader would then be the person who advocated for Susie with her potential new boss. So I think some technology is wonderful. I think maybe to supplement technology, HR being someone who helps to broker talent moves can be very helpful. But it also goes to, are we recognizing rewarding line leaders for sending talent to other places? Can a line leader get away with saying, oh, I would let you have Susie, but she's on a big special project right now. And the next year, you know, Susie's wonderful. You should have her, but you know, she's really busy with X. You know, can a manager get in the way of Susie getting to where Susie should be? And are we clear with talent that if we offer you the opportunity for mobility, that you only get so many chances around that? So if Monica comes to me and says, hey, Marc, I've got a great opportunity for you. It's in Kuala Lumpur. And I say, well, Monica, I was thinking more Paris. Do you have Paris available? We need to have a discussion about you only get so many chances to say no to the opportunity that we think is right for you. Because while there's a marketplace, there should also be proactive movement of talent by the business to say, I know Marc would enjoy Paris. We think, because of our collective knowledge about the business and about Marc, that the best next move for him is Kuala Lumpur, and help me to understand mobility, yes, but sometimes it's directed mobility.
Great. Thank you, Marc, and thank you, Monica.
Thank you, Monica.
Hey, Alissa, can I jump back in here just to follow up on something that Marc was saying? Because I think that, you know, the key thing around the internal talent movement conversation, I do think that having solid succession plans is really key to help getting in front of this, you know, whether Susie would want to move to Lumpur or whether, you know, she wants to go to Paris. Because what it does is it really forces that conversation of the manager to the employee to say, what do you want? And oftentimes I'm not sure that we have that conversation enough with the employee. We may assume certain things, but how frequently are we actually sitting down with the employee and saying, what's important to you? What are you willing to do? Would you like to move to a particular market? Or even to what extent are we giving people the opportunity to work remotely? You know, that's a big thing for us right now, given our, you know, talent shortage and skills shortage. We've got to be more strategic in the way that we move talent. And we also have to be more creative. I don't know that remote work is necessarily creative, but I actually think that you do have to have the right kind of internal system set up and the right kind of education to ensure that remote work is successful. So just wanted to add a few things there. I mean, it's a little bit of, you know, operational mechanism and thoughtful conversation, but it can go a long way in actually driving to the outcome that the company may be looking for.
Yeah, maybe I could just add a couple more things from what Monica was saying. I think what we're seeing with our clients is a divergence into two types of approaches. There's one, which I think Monica really described particularly well, where the talent function or the HR function is in control of the internal labor market. So whether that's the demand for talent and the particular roles that are required, or the supply and the capabilities of talent that you have in the organization, and then you're able to act as this broker for talent. I think there are other clients who say that they don't have that information, or the situation's too dynamic, or their function is becoming disrupted rather than disruptive, and that they're not able to have the control or the stability to be able to do that effectively. And so what happens then is what you see in a lot of other markets, whether it's a market for music or how we like to watch TV or whatever else it might be, where the information is given to the individual. So this is the individual talent within our organizations. So they know their own capabilities. They get to see the results of the talent assessments or the feedback that they're receiving. And they have that self-awareness, they have the confidence, and they have, to some extent, the organizational permission to go out there and be an entrepreneur for their own talent. And they find the opportunities, they make the connections, the organizational culture supports that. And if there are barriers like visas, like languages, like trailing families, like all the other classic challenges that we have to make our internal labor markets more efficient, then they will find a solution to that. And they are probably the best placed person in the system to find those solutions, as long as they're empowered and as long as they understand what the organizational parameters are around that type of decision.
Thanks, David. One question that I want to throw out to the group, if any of the three of you have some thoughts, we had gotten a question about talent mobility in nonprofit organizations where sometimes the finances and being able to spend on mobility, movement, immigration, even, potentially, a cost difference in different countries could have an impact. Have any of you had experience with nonprofit organizations as it relates to kind of talent mobility and moving people around and how to really try to overcome maybe some of the financial challenges or limitations? No. So for our colleague that asked that question, I'm sorry that we don't have insight to share, but I did want to get your question thrown out there. So let me just see. We just have a few minutes left trying to track the questions. So we had a question, what is the panel's view on career drivers, career pathing, and frameworks? And I think, even if we think about what we heard from Marc about people wanting to grow their careers, and then the difference that we see both internally and externally, as well as in different parts of the world. David, you kind of started by talking about the under 25s really wanting fast career pathing and recognition and mobility. Maybe if each of you could just take like a minute sort of to share your quick thoughts so that we have some time for wrap up, but as it relates to career pathing and career drivers.
So, sorry, go ahead, Marc.
Yeah, step with you. Just really, I think the challenge is that 20 years ago, when the last big recession hit, companies threw out a lot of training and development and came up with this wonderful slogan that you own your career, which means we're not going to do anything for you. And I think over time, hopefully that balance has shifted back a bit, where we said, yes, we do want to invest, but we don't want to now promise people a career ladder or a career path that feels like we're setting ourselves up for failure. And what we found is helpful is, if we believe in 70-20-10, if we do believe that experiences are going to be the biggest driver, why don't we just help to map out within a function the experiences that matter most, and simply say we have a view within finance that these are the 14 or 15 experiences that are going to be your internal resume builders, and you should want to do as many of these things as successfully as many times as possible. We're not going to promise you that if you check every experience box, you get a prize, but if you do a really good job at each of those experiences, you will position yourself amazingly well when the next promotion or movement opportunity comes up. So you give people enough of a set of handles to guide their career without a promise, but also without saying we're going to let 1,000 flowers bloom. We hope that people will somehow figure out how to develop. It also helps to take the manager or make the manager a little more effective, because I think we have this very silly notion in HR that managers are development experts, and they're not. They're managers who are simply trying to do their own job. So how do we give managers a bit more say, within this function of finance or marketing or HR, we have a point of view about the right experiences to have?
Yeah, I think two things to add to what Marc was saying. I think it's very important that we manage managers to be great talent developers, and that we are transparent about that, because if we're not transparent about that, then the unintended consequences are that it's actually, in many cases, the manager is motivated or incentivized to keep the best talent in their team and become more and more reliant on the best talent. So I think, having scorecards, having very transparent metrics for managers and the role that they play in talent development is very important. Secondly, I think the first point that Marc made, having this sort of transparent approach in terms of what the key experiences or achievements or qualifications or whatever else the criteria might be is very important, because then making it transparent makes sure that when it comes to diversity, when it comes to asking ourselves the question in the organization, are these really valid experiences, or are they just the things that have always happened and that always seem to be the way that people would progress in previous generations? I think what we see with younger employees coming into the workplace is that they're very ambitious. They want tangible development outcomes to be achieved, and they're thirsty for that. And if you can't provide it for them, they will go and find it themselves and then come and challenge you for that. And at the same time, they also find many organizations anachronistic in terms of the way that they expect people to be productive and collaborate with each other, particularly the sorts of devices that they have. We have a lot of feedback from young workers on their first day of work saying that they felt that they were going into Jurassic Park. They were given old-fashioned devices. They were restricted on the sorts of resources that they could use online and offline. And people were feeling threatened when they jumped the hierarchy and just went to ask questions from the people who were at the top of the hierarchy because they thought they should know the answers. So these things, I think, are part of the negotiation between all generations that we've had, I think, throughout human history. But I think we need to make sure that we're not having criteria which are taken for granted or criteria which are sort of kept in the shadows. And therefore we can't analyze them, we can't validate them, and we can't make sure that they're future-proofed, both for the organizations and for the talent function itself.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, and I'll add on here because, you know, we've spent quite a bit of time and investment in this space. It's a great point to bring up and question to raise. We have a couple of models that have really helped, and you know, Marc talked about you know, how there have been different expectations of employees, maybe even managers, in terms of what their role might be in the whole career experience. And we have had that same question within Microsoft. We have a model that really spells that out, talking about the employee does own their career, but the manager cares. And then the last one is that the organization enables. And so really those three groups, you know, employee owns, manager cares, and the organization enables, is really how great career experiences happen within the organization. But, you know, we're finding some of the same things that, you know, David also alluded to, which is managers, one, they want to, we struggle with managers that want to keep the best talent, right? And so the idea of being a talent exporter, the next question, you know, we talk about being a great talent exporter, the next question they have is, well, am I going to get great talent into my organization? And so that's a dynamic that we're definitely dealing with. But we tell managers that you have a role to model great leadership, coach employees, help them grow and develop, and then care about their career. And so there's quite a bit of emphasis on care, because if you think about how we may care for, you know, one of our children or a friend or a loved one, you know, it's more than just, hey, we're going to give you information, but we're actually going to, you know, introduce you to our networks. Like if I'm a manager, I'm going to introduce you to my network. I'm going to sit down and take the time with you, not to just talk about how you're contributing, but just about how you may be growing. I'm going to, again, figure out what it is you want to, you know, go do. And if you're not sure, I'm going to work with you to help you get to kind of what the next step might be for you. And so there is a pivotal role. I do think that the manager is a linchpin in that whole career experience. And that, of course, lastly, that we're giving employees, you know, kind of self-help resources. I mean, I think there's so many things employees can do. You know, there's so many things people can do on their own now, right? You can book a hotel if you'd like, or you can go to an Airbnb if you'd rather just stay with, you know, stay at somebody's place in a particular area. You know, we can order an Uber whenever we want to, or a Lyft whenever we want to go someplace. And so it's kind of, again, using that same psychology to say, how do we ensure we get information to people, because they do feel empowered, that can be helpful to them, while we're evolving and developing the manager to be effective in caring and helping the employee achieve their career goals. So that's what we're really focusing on right now. And it's been really exciting to delve deeply into this. It's one of the things we feel that be the most impactful for our employees at Microsoft.
Great. Thank you all very much. David, Monica, and Marc. And to all of our participants, thank you for the active talk session. And I wish you a wonderful rest of the Hacking HR conference. I hope this is not only a really informative week for everybody, but also an opportunity to meet new colleagues and continue the learnings that we've had in this last hour about what's going on in our peer companies and across the globe. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of the conference.